Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, taking a look at the 1932 election that brought Roosevelt to power. Now, as I've said in my presentation, Hoover the Do-Nothing President, though this was an exceptional depression, Hoover was still slow to understand the true nature of the crash. And the do-nothing president stood in contrast to a man who, as governor of New York State, had already shown he was prepared to act, and as presidential candidate promised much more. So let's look at the choice presented the American people in 1932. Hoover did provide funds for schemes, like the Hoover Dam on the Colorado River. He also introduced tax cuts in both 1930 and 1931 in the hope that it would stimulate spending and investment. And he increased import tariffs by 50% on a wide range of goods. And in 1932 he set up the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which provided loans to help businesses. He also tried to help farmers, but it was nowhere near enough to really alleviate the situation. His campaign for the 1932 election held true to his belief that only individuals, not governments, would get America out of the Great Depression. And he believed that too much government help would break the spirit of rugged individualism, of self-help, that had helped make America so strong. Business would bring America out of the Depression, if it was left alone to do so. What became his catchphrase was that prosperity was just around the corner. Other than that, he argued every individual had to take responsibility for their own plight, and that things would be worse under a Democrat president. But the majority of Americans did not share his blind optimism, nor agree with his attack on the Democrats. Rather, they held Republicans, who had been in the White House throughout the 1920s, and Hoover particularly, responsible for the mess they and America were in. There were the Hoovervilles of the homeless, and the Hoover blankets, the newspapers the poor wrapped around themselves to try and keep warm, and an unemployed man's pockets turned inside out to show that he had no money was known as a Hoover flag. But it was a banner carried by protesting Iowa farmers that best summed up the feeling of the majority of Americans when it declared, "In Hoover we trusted, and now we are busted." When Hoover attempted to speak in Detroit, mounted police were needed to disperse an angry crowd. Franklin D. Roosevelt, or FDR, as governor of New York State, a state similar in size to Britain and including 10% of all Americans, organized the first scheme by any state to assist the unemployed. It was also as state governor that he first raised the need for government to look after the forgotten man. In sharp contrast to Hoover, FDR believed that government should get involved to improve life for the ordinary citizen, and certainly when they faced an appalling depression that was no fault of their own. He declared, "One of the duties of the state is that of caring for those of its citizens who find themselves the victims of such adverse circumstances as make them unable to obtain even the necessities for mere existence without the aid of others." His approach was popular with the people of New York State, and in 1930 he was re-elected with a record majority. And though he had to fight hard to win the Democratic nomination, his nomination acceptance speech only looked ahead. "I pledge myself to a New Deal for the American people." Though he didn't go into details, his campaign promised 4 key things that appealed to Americans. He promised relief for the unemployed and the poor. He promised government schemes to provide more jobs. He promised measures to revive agriculture and industry. And he promised protection for workers against unscrupulous employers. He also won support by promising to end prohibition, which had become discredited and unpopular. But above all, in contrast to the do-nothing president, Roosevelt promised action. He believed in active government, and he promised America a New Deal. This is what he said in a campaign speech in San Francisco. The country needs, and unless I mistake its mood, demands bold experiments. Above all, try something. Then there were the campaigns. Hoover left people in despair. He was seen as a do-nothing president, lacking compassion. He had offered little until the election year, and even then his treatment of the bonus marches had been a personal disaster for him. And he seemed to offer nothing in his election campaign but that America had turned the corner. In sharp contrast, Roosevelt made people feel he was on their side. He campaigned across the country, talking to people about their problems, and he took his message of hope to the American people. Using trains, he travelled more than 30,000 kilometres across America, making 16 major speeches and another 60 from the back of his trains. He was charismatic. People were impressed by Roosevelt's energy and determination to do something, and he had gained a reputation as governor of New York for helping the state's unemployed by using public money to fund job creation schemes. The bottom line was that Roosevelt gave hope. He also smiled a lot. This may seem insignificant, but the fact that so many people refer to it suggests it wasn't. His campaign song, heard everywhere he went, was "Happy Days Are Here Again." The result was a landslide victory for Roosevelt. He won with almost 7 million more votes, winning all but 6 states. It was the biggest electoral victory to that date. What's more, the Democrats took control of Congress too. So there you are. Thank you so much for listening, and the best of luck in your studies. Check out my website, History Made Easier too. It's there to help you as well. But for now, cheers.